The autumn sun hung low over Washington, D.C., casting long shadows across the National Mall. The air carried a crisp bite, and leaves swirled gently on the breeze, tumbling past marble monuments that stood like silent sentinels. In a small, cozy cafe just off Pennsylvania Avenue, the scent of fresh coffee mingled with the murmur of conversation. Wooden tables, worn smooth by years of use, held steaming mugs and half-finished pastries. Outside, the world buzzed with tension, but inside, the cafe felt like a haven, a place where time slowed, and people could breathe. Barack sat at a corner table, his hands wrapped around a ceramic mug. At 64, his hair was more silver than black, but his eyes still held that calm, thoughtful spark. He wore a simple navy sweater, the sleeves rolled up, and a pair of glasses rested on the bridge of his nose. He was reading a newspaper, the kind with ink that smudged your fingers. The headline screamed in bold letters, "Trump insults Barack Obama. Go back to Africa, nation awaits response." Barack's lips pressed into a thin line, but he didn't flinch. He'd seen worse, he'd heard worse. Still, the words stung, like a paper cut you don't notice until it starts to burn. Across the cafe, a young barista named Maya wiped down the counter. She was 22, with a quick smile and a habit of humming softly while she worked. Her apron was dusted with flour, and her curly hair was tied back in a loose bun. She glanced at Barack, her gaze lingering. She'd recognized him the moment he walked in, how could she not? His face had been on every screen, every magazine, for years. But he wasn't here as a former president. He was just a man, sitting alone, reading words that were meant to wound. Maya felt a knot in her chest. She'd grown up admiring Barack. Her parents had his campaign poster framed in their living room, a faded relic from 2008. To her, he wasn't just a politician, he was proof that someone who looked like her could rise, could matter. The headline made her stomach churn. How could anyone say something so cruel? And why did it feel like the whole country was holding its breath, waiting for him to respond? Barack folded the newspaper and set it down. He took a slow sip of his coffee, the steam curling upward like a sigh. He wasn't angry, not yet. Anger was too easy, too loud. He'd learned long ago to let the noise pass, to wait for the quiet moment when clarity came. But the words lingered. Go back to Africa. They weren't just an insult. They were a challenge, a dare to prove he belonged. He'd been proving it his whole life, to classmates, to colleagues, to a nation. And now, to a man who thrived on division. Outside, the sky was turning golden, the kind of light that made everything feel softer, more forgiving. Barack leaned back in his chair, his fingers tracing the edge of the mug. He thought of his daughters, Malia and Sasha, grown now, carving their own paths. He thought of Michelle, her strength like a lighthouse in every storm. He thought of his mother, who'd raised him to believe in possibility. And he thought of the millions who'd looked to him, not just as a leader, but as a symbol. What did he owe them now? A fiery speech, a cutting retort, or something else entirely? Maya approached his table, a fresh pot of coffee in her hand. "Refill?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. Barack looked up, his smile warm but tired. "Sure, thanks, Maya." She paused, surprised he'd remembered her name from the tag on her apron. "You doing okay?" she asked, then bit her lip, worried she'd overstepped. He chuckled, a low, gentle sound. "I've had better days, but this coffee helps." Maya poured, the dark liquid steaming as it filled the mug. "I saw the paper," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's awful. I'm sorry." Barack nodded, his gaze drifting to the window. "It's not new," he said. Just louder this time. Maya lingered, unsure what to say. She wanted to ask how he stayed so calm, how he didn't let the hate consume him. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she said, "You don't have to answer them, you know. You don't owe them anything." He looked at her then, really looked, and saw the sincerity in her eyes. "Maybe not," he said. "But I owe myself something. And maybe others, too." The cafe grew quieter as the evening crowd thinned. A soft jazz tune played in the background, its notes weaving through the air like a conversation. Barack's thoughts drifted to a memory, Hawaii, decades ago, walking along the beach with his grandmother. She'd told him, "People will try to make you small, Barack. Don't let them. But don't fight small, either. Be bigger. He'd carried those words through every campaign, every crisis. Now, they echoed again. The problem wasn't the insult itself. It was the weight it carried, the way it stirred old wounds, for him and for millions. It wasn't just about Barack Obama. It was about every person who'd ever been told they didn't belong, that their roots were a flaw, not a strength. He could ignore it, let it fade into the noise of a 24-hour news cycle. But that felt like letting the wound fester. He could fire back, match venom with venom. But that would only feed the storm. There had to be another way, a way to rise without sinking. As the cafe's lights dimmed, Barack pulled a small notebook from his pocket. He always carried one, a habit from his organizing days. He began to write, the pen moving slowly, deliberately. Not a speech, not a statement. Something personal, a letter, not to Trump, but to America. To the people who felt the sting of those words, who wondered if they'd ever truly belong. Maya watched from behind the counter, her hand still on a damp rag. She didn't know what he was writing, but she felt a shift in the air, like the calm before a sunrise. She thought of her own life, her parents' stories of struggle, her own dreams of becoming a writer. She'd always wanted to tell stories that mattered, stories that healed. Maybe, she thought, that's what he's doing now. The letter took shape over the next hour. Barack wrote about his father, born in Kenya, whose dreams had carried him across oceans. He wrote about his mother, whose love had anchored him. He wrote about the America he'd seen, not perfect, but striving, always striving, to be better. He wrote about the kids in Chicago's South Side, the farmers in Iowa, the teachers in Ohio, who'd shown him what resilience looked like. And he wrote about belonging, not as a gift given by others, but as a truth you claimed for yourself. I've been told to go back, before, he wrote. Not always in those words, but in glances, in questions, in doubts. Where are you from? No, really, where are you from? But here's what I know. I am American. Not because of where I was born, but because of what I believe, what I've worked for, what I've loved. And so are you. No one gets to take that from us. The twist came not in anger, but in quiet resolve. Barack didn't send the letter to a news outlet or post it online. Instead, he folded it carefully and slipped it into his pocket. He'd share it, but not yet. First, he wanted to read it to Michelle, to hear her thoughts. He wanted to send it to Malia and Sasha, to remind them of their own strength. And he wanted to share it with people like Maya, ordinary folks who carried the weight of those words, too. He stood, leaving a generous tip on the table, and nodded to Maya. Thanks for the coffee, he said. And the company. Maya smiled, her eyes bright. Anytime. Outside, the air was cooler now, the sky a deep indigo. Barack walked slowly, the letter a warm weight in his pocket. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to win a debate. He'd learned, over years of storms, that the truest responses were the ones that endured, quiet, steady, rooted in love. Days later, the letter found its way into the world. Not through a press conference, but through a small community event in Chicago. Barack read it aloud to a room of students, teachers, and neighbors. Maya was there, in the back, her notebook open, her pen flying. The room was silent as he spoke, his voice steady, like a river carving stone. When he finished, the applause was soft at first, then grew, not loud, but deep, like a heartbeat. The letter spread, shared on X, printed in newspapers, read on air. It wasn't a shock in the way the headline had been. It didn't divide or inflame. Instead, it settled, like rain on parched ground. People read it in coffee shops, in classrooms, in living rooms. They read it to their children. They read it to themselves. And in its words, they found something solid, a reminder that belonging wasn't about permission, but about truth. Back in the cafe, Maya pinned a copy of the letter to the bulletin board, next to flyers for open mic nights and book clubs. She traced the words with her finger, feeling their weight. She didn't know if she'd ever meet Barack again, but she knew she'd carry this moment with her. A quiet man, a cup of coffee, a letter that felt like home. And outside, the leaves kept falling, the monuments stood tall, and the world turned on, a little softer, a little kinder, under the autumn sky.